Hello and welcome along to the Panto podcast. This week my guests are father and son double act Simmons and Simmons for this penultimate episode of the series. In this episode we talk about Keith's 50th pantomime and Ben's 20th, how joining the act happened and how their partnership has evolved. So please sit back and enjoy the latest Panto podcast. This week's guest for the Panto podcast is Simmons and Simmons, or shall I say Simmons and Simmons Mark II? Is that the best?
well, no, because it used to be the Simmons brothers when I was with my brother Alan. We worked together for 36 years. Then we packed up working together quite amicably, and Alan went back to his first love of ventriloquism. So he replaced me with a dummy, I'm afraid. I was a bit concerned about that. And then after 3 years of floating around on my own, Ben joined me and we formed Simmons and Simmons, which was a name that took us ages to think up. So, you joined me and we did our first pantomime together at the Hawth at Crawley.
That's right, yeah. And we've just done our 15th together at Lytham St Anne's.
Your 20th pantomime and my 50th, which is a frightening thing to think of.
I was going to say congratulations on hitting that big milestone.
Well, I have to say it got quite emotional. We were our third year at Lytham St Anne's, the Lowther Pavilion, which is a smashing little theatre. And the company took me out for a meal in Blackpool, and we finished up by Blackpool Tower, and suddenly someone said, "Look up at the tower," and as I looked up, my name lit up on the tower, and it said, "Keith Simmons, 50 pantomimes, oh yes it is." One of the most emotional things that's ever happened to me. And our company manager, a lovely lady called Jenny Northam, she'd organised it to be done for me, so yeah, it was incredible. But it's been an amazing career, 50 years of pantos. I've actually been in the business 52 years. I missed 2 years of pantomimes. But he's given me a new lease of life, actually. Ben working with me. We write together now and also direct them as well. It's been a great time. Really has.
What was it like then, Ben, having a funny dad?
It's weird, really. I think it was an extension of our home life. Dad was always kind of quite silly at home, and I was aware of what he did and going to watch my dad and uncle in shows, and he was always the funny one and my uncle was the serious one, sort of trying to keep him under control. And whilst he was sort of still my dad at home, he always sort of brought that home. We've always had a silly relationship and always joked about with each other, and that's just sort of carried on when we started working together. When Dad and Alan stopped working together, and like he said, he did 3 years on his own, the producers always wanted him to do their old routines, so he'd have to do them with someone else. And these people, you did it with Tim Healy, with Jeff Hughes, some of your old routines, and they found it incredibly difficult to perform it and tough to learn. And I said to Dad, I don't know why, because I'd grown up with it, I just found it all really easy and I knew it all. And he said, well, we should work together. And then we sort of did a trial.
Because you were an out-of-work actor at the time.
I was, yeah. I went to drama school and then, was struggling. And then, we worked together. We did a sort of tryout show in King's Cross in London, and that went really well. And then we did a panto about 6 months after that, our first one together.
With the great Dave Benson Phillips. He was Dick Whittington, and we had a great season at
But it does. We've always sort of been mates as well as family, and it's just been nice. We've done, obviously, writing and directing. No one's ever completely at ease with each other 100% of the time, so we have had our moments of disagreements, but we always get on really well.
In fact, we could have one in a minute, actually.
And now, lads, come on, no fisticuffs.
Right.
But no, we always get on really well, and it's always just a great atmosphere. Usually we end up sort of mucking about and laughing, whatever we do.
Well, I like writing with Ben. Was when I used to write pantomimes on my own. With Ben, I've written quite a few, but overall I've written about 120 pantomimes, I think.
That many?
So it's grown a bit. I mean, the best year I ever had when Paul Elliott was employing me for E&B Productions. He sent me a letter, and I've still got the letter, asking me to write 10 pantomimes that year and naming them all and where they were going to be. But the most important thing, telling me how much I was going to earn from it.
So that was all right then.
Yeah, that was good. But that's the most I've written in 1 year. But it was always a problem. It used to be a blank sheet of paper. Now it's a blank computer screen when you start trying to write the things. So suddenly writing with Ben, has helped me a great deal. But it's quite interesting because now I suggest a gag, and he just says, "No, we won't do that."
It's like having someone to bounce off with ideas, but also someone to reject the bad idea. But not it happens to me as well. But it's funny when you're writing, you can be sat there and stuff flows for a little while, and you spend a half hour, an hour, and you're like, "Oh, this is all quite good stuff."
Yeah.
And then you can have 2 hours where you can't think of 1 or 2 gags, and you just sort of get bogged down for ages. Then you're like, "Oh, we better move on. We'll come back to this later." But there were quite often times where I'll go, and then he could say that, and Dad will be like, "No, you can't have that," and Dad will say, "I've thought of this thing," and say, "No, that's terrible."
Yeah.
So you do sort of
Actually, if we're writing late at night, a lot of things seem much funnier late at night than in the cold light of day. Actually, that's the risk.
You come back to it another day, like, why did we think that was good? Or that. Sometimes you also know something's going to work, and then when you see it on stage come to life, it's really satisfying.
Yeah, it really is. And of course, all the stories. We know most of the pantomime stories, so you know the basis of what you're going to write, and it just depends then who's in the panto. Because I remember writing one for Dick Whittington where Alderman Fitzwarren, played by the great Paul Daniels, he was the star of the show. So suddenly that part of Alderman had to be built up because he had to be on stage, obviously, a lot more than other people. But
I think when you're writing, people think pantomime, it must be easy to write. You've got a story and you just attribute the lines to the people. But it's that that can actually be quite tricky. For instance, when you did all those Dick Whittingtons with Leslie Joseph and John Nettles, suddenly you had the fairy and the king rat who are the top of the bills, and usually with Dick Whittington it wouldn't be that way, would it?
No,
so then you've got to have the fairy be in a lot more scenes than she would ever be in, and not just doing the sort of narrative part of the story and the sort of little interludes and things. She's suddenly got to take a main role in it, and equally with John Nettles as King Rat. So you do have to change scripts quite drastically depending on who's
He was a great
part.
King Rat, John Nettles. I remember we'd done all the rehearsals, and then suddenly he turned up for the press call, and he'd had a Mohican haircut.
Oh,
unbelievable! and he did this really elaborate makeup with warps and things. He looked incredible when he was ready for the stage.
he really got into it.
Yeah, he really did. Yeah.
I always remember that. I must have been about 14, 15 when you started doing that. You did a run of about 7 years with the same, basically the same production. And he would come to the front of the stage, John Nettles, in this grotesque makeup. He'd had all fake boils put on his face and stuff, and he'd just spit on the stage, but sort of really slowly and disgustingly. And you could see all the audience go, "Oh, no, that's horrible." Like he really went
He really
for
did
it.
live the part.
Yeah.
But another great King Rat, and I think he only ever played it once, was Jeff Holland, from Heidi High.
Yeah.
He was with us with Ken Dodd in Birmingham, and that was a Dick Whittington, and he was King Rat. But that's the great story about you were terrified of him.
Yeah,
weren't
I
you?
was only 4 at the time or something like that, and I remember. Well, I can remember seeing him, this huge man in makeup as King Rat, being absolutely terrified of him, and even though he was being nice to me backstage, not wanting to have anything to do with him because I was too scared. So he was obviously playing it well.
Yeah, but my brother Alan at that time travelled a cat, him and his wife Julia. Julia was dancing in the show as well. And they had a cat which they kept in our dressing room, and we were sharing with Jeff Holland. And one day Jeff walked in with a bite to eat between shows, and the cat was just using its litter tray.
Oh.
So Jeff came out and sat outside on the landing. And as he was sitting there, still in all his King Rat makeup, Ken Dodd's lady, Anne, she came down the stairs and said, "What's up?" He said, "There's a cat in there." And she said, "It looks ridiculous, this King Rat character, frightened of going in the dressing room of a cat." I thought it was great moments.
You've worked with so many wonderful people, though, and Ben, it must have been quite daunting as well, meeting some of these people that were household names.
It's
or
funny,
are household
as
names.
I've got older, there are some people I've kind of been like, I can't believe I'm working with these people. When I was a kid, it was sort of, rather than getting stage struck or sort of starstruck or anything like that, I just kind of got used to it and not sort of blasé with it. But I can remember my friends saying, "Oh my God, you've just met Des O'Connor at the time, or you just met Wolf from Gladiators at the time, and Chris Akabusi you did Pantos with." And I was like, "Yeah, they're all right, they're really nice." And at the age of about 12, 15, 16, just saying hello, getting used to being around celebrities and stuff. But I remember when we did Pantomime with Neil Morrissey, for me that was brilliant because I loved Men Behaving Badly. And it's kind of like you get to a stage in your career where you don't just work with these people, but you're directing the shows as well, and you're kind of on a different level with it, you know. So they think of you differently within the production as just a colleague, or the person they look to for advice with things and stuff like that. Yeah. And I like to get into know Neil Morrissey and thinking of him as a mate rather than just someone you're working with over Panto.
And he really has become a mate. Yeah. He's a really, really great guy.
And equally in Chesterfield, we worked with Liz McClarnon from Atomic Kitten, and it's one of the few people I've worked with that when I was a teenager, you know, I was sort of aware of Atomic Kitten being in the charts and thinking they were all quite attractive and stuff, and then it's so weird.
Don't let's mince words, you fancy it. Right,
okay. You're going to get in trouble.
Yeah. No, but it was wonderful to work with her as well.
Well, and Steps, wasn't it? Lisa Scott Lee was...
Yeah,
I was her father in Pantomime. I was the king.
That's right, I was the Lord Chamberlain.
Yeah,
she was the princess. And I had to tell her the story. When I was at university, my 20th birthday, we all went out to a club, and I was one of those sad people that had learnt the moves to the Dance for Tragedy. And my mates screwed me over and went and told the DJ that I knew it, and he called me to the dance floor, and I thought it was because it was my birthday, and I didn't realise it, and he put the tragedy dance on, and I had to do it. And I thought, all my friends will come on to the dance floor with me, and they just left me on my own. There was a spotlight on me in this club of about 300 people, all thinking, who is that sad man doing the tragedy dance on his own? And I got to tell Lisa Scott Lee that she did sympathise with me.
Yeah. But no, it's been great. And looking back, like he's got photographs from Uncle Les Dawson, for instance. They'd write Uncle in front of their names.
And Richard Bryars did something
Richard
similar.
Bryars,
Bernard Breslau, I remember. Because Dad used to get me people's autographs. He worked with. I've got autograph books from all these people.
Yeah,
it's great.
It has been amazing. Yeah, it really
it's a lovely industry most of the time, isn't
well,
it?
That's right. That's why I admire what you're doing with this, actually, because so many people in this industry poo-poo pantomime, actually, which is really sad to me, because I think it's a wonderful art form. It covers everything in our business, because not only are they dramatic stories, there's great music in them, there's good comedy and audience participation. It's such a wide-ranging thing that it presents to an audience. And of course, my big thing is that kids come and it's their first introduction to theatre normally. I mean, most people, if you say to them, what was the first show you ever saw as a child? It was a pantomime. And hopefully it will keep them coming back to live theatre throughout their lives. So it's very important. So I really admire what you're doing with these. No, I think it's great.
Well, that's another thing, just getting all the stories from people who in 20, 30 years when they're gone and people have moved on and it's a new generation, you're preserving the history of it as well, which is really important.
I was going back to the very first pantomime I ever did, 1968, in Bath, at the lovely Theatre Royal in Bath, for a great man called Frank Maddox. And I finished up doing 4 pantomimes for him there, my brother and I. And we always called him Mr. Maddox. It was never Frank. You know, hello, Mr. Maddox. How are you? We all used to queue up outside his office on Fridays for what we called treasury, being paid. And then we'd go to the pump room with Bath, all the company, for a cup of tea or a coffee or something. But the comic in those days there was a great guy called Jimmy Mack. And Jimmy had done, I think, 15 consecutive pantomimes at Bath, and he always played the same character. He was Jimmy Green in every pantomime, no matter what it was. And I learned so much just from watching this Jimmy Mack. He was really, really a great pantomime man, you know, and he loved it. And he also introduced my brother and I to extra work on television. He said, you should be doing some of that in between pantos and summer seasons and bits. And he signed us up with an agency, the Jeff Shane agency, who used to put extras into television programmes. But I always remember it the day he said, we've got to take your measurements. So Jimmy measured me to send to this guy for costumes and things, and he finished up making my waist bigger than my chest. So I didn't trust him anymore on things like that. But no, he was a lovely guy, Jimmy Mack. And his wife, Winnie, you can still see her on David Bowie's Ashes to Ashes video, and she's walking along the beach with David Bowie at the end of the video talking to him, and that was Winnie Mac, Jimmy's wife. Yeah, it's just silly things like that suddenly come to you.
I like stuff like that where you learnt a lot of your craft by watching someone like him, and you kind of don't appreciate the position we're in now, because we've done 3 years at the Lowther at Lytham St Anne's, and by the nature of it, it's not a huge theatre, so they don't have a huge name in it. And
well, that's why they've got us.
yeah, and they've had some people who are, well, the way a lot of production companies with Panto work now, they get people who are still in drama school using it as their experience of learning, and people who are recently out of drama school. And we always get people say to us, I've learned so much by being in the show with you, and you don't even necessarily think about that at the time. You're directing it and you want to make it as good as possible, and you're not really thinking about, but it's important because other people are learning the industry as well by doing
that's
it.
Yeah. And it's even things like, when you refer to, I still refer to it as OP or prompt side of the stage, you know. People say, what do you mean OP? I said, that's opposite prompt. One side is prompt side, the other side is opposite prompt. And that's what I learned when we first started. Now you just say stage right or stage left, really, you know. And then the baddie only comes on from one side, and the good fairy only comes on from the other side, you know, and all those sorts of things. And you just take it all for granted, but people just starting out don't know some of that sort of ruling, you know. It's interesting. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned about children going to pantomime. Did you go to pantomime as a child?
Yeah, I did. I remember several years going to the Palladium pantomime. There was a man called David Davenport who always played the immortal in the pantomimes there, and I got to work with his daughter at Gravesend. Amanda Davenport was our principal boy in Aladdin at Gravesend many years later. But I saw David Whitfield at the Palladium in Robinson Crusoe, and I remember there was a shows you how times have changed. There was a photograph on the front of the Evening News, or the London Evening Standard, whatever the paper was, of the lady who used to paint a map on David Whitfield's chest every day for this performance, and it was like this lucky woman is getting to see David Whitfield stripped to the waist. I mean, I couldn't believe it. But I saw him in that, and then I saw my great hero in Aladdin, Norman Wisdom. And he was brilliant, he used to throw out rubber hammers into the audience, and I got one of those rubber hammers. And many years later, firstly my wife Fran worked with him in the Norman Wisdom Christmas show at Chatham, your hometown, I believe, Hayden. Yeah. And then I got to meet him there, and then several years later, luckily got to work with him. Did 11 tours with Norman Wisdom, the Simmons brothers did, so he became a great mate. And I don't think I had this rubber hammer to show him, but I did tell him that I'd got one from him when he was at the Palladium.
You were working with him at the time I got married, and I remember we invited him to our wedding because he used to phone up every couple of weeks and speak to mum and dad and stuff, and they were quite close, so we invited him, not really thinking he'd come. It was just sort of being polite and thought it was a nice thing to do, but he did come, didn't he? Yeah. And he sang Don't Laugh at Me Because I'm a Fool at my wedding reception. And while we were having all photos done, he picked up my wife Hayley and went to run off with her. And sometimes when we're having rows, she said she wished she went with him.
Yes. Another great character. I'm sad that I never got to do a pantomime with him, actually, but
I used to when I was about 10 or 11 and you did a couple of tours with Norman, I used to bring some of his props on stage from the wings and stuff, and
he tried to trip you up, wouldn't he?
Yeah, but that was great. He obviously had his act, which was really important, and he always did it exactly the same, didn't he?
Yeah, word for word, it never changed. 55 minutes, he always did 55 minutes. Him and his straight man Tony Fane. And incredible. And all his instruments, he played clarinet and he played all sorts of things and drums and that, but everything had to be set exactly right. And if anything was in the wrong place, he'd go on stage just before the curtains opened and move a thing a few inches just to get it exactly how we wanted.
But it's funny, that much of a perfectionist, and yet I brought his drums on a couple of times, and that didn't throw him off. He'd have someone bring on this big bass drum, and because I was at the show with my dad, he knew I liked it.
Let Ben do this.
Yeah, it's really sort of got me involved.
But I really do wish I'd done pantomime with him, because he was a great pantomime artist, actually. It was one of the things I miss. But as you said, so many great people I did work with. Danny LaRue I did 4 pantos with. Des O'Connor 3. Les Dawson did a pantomime. He was a great widow twanky, Les Dawson, great Dave, you know. And another lovely man. I keep saying about all these people, I try only to talk about people I like.
So if we go through the little list of all who you work with, if you don't name check any, then we know. Is that how it is?
Yeah. God, if any of them are listening to this, he never mentioned me.
You said about Les Dawson, I did a panto when I was 10 years old. I was the boy Babe in Babes in the Wood at the Orchard at Dartford, and Roy Barraclough was the Dame.
Oh yeah, who used to work with Les.
And he was great. I remember at the time everyone was really friendly backstage. We had Peter Duncan was Robin Hood, and Ken Goodwin was the comedy character in that.
Yeah.
And there were 3 teams of boy and girl babes, and I was the second team. So we did about a third of the run. We did about 3 weeks or something. But I remember there was one time it snowed quite badly, and all the junior dancers got snowed in. And there was a scene where the boy and girl babe went to sleep in the woods. There was a dance where we got like covered with leaves and protected. Because all these dancers couldn't come in, I said I would do this extra line and say we'll have to cover ourselves with leaves. I remember it was a big thing, like everyone trusting me at the age of 10 to do this new line in the show at short notice. But I was quite happy.
And you carried it off well.
Yeah, it was fine.
So Keith, were Mum and Dad very supportive of you and your brother?
Yeah, very much so, because my dad had been a professional musician at one time of his life. He was a great trumpet player. Everyone said he had a brilliant tone on trumpet, and for a while he was with the Ken Firmin Orchestra when Lions Corner houses used to have orchestras playing, and he was at with this orchestra. He was at Lions Corner House in Coventry Street in London. And someone's told me it had 5 floors and there was a different orchestra on each floor. I mean, unbelievable how they could afford to do that. But he was coming home one night during the blackout in World War II, and he tripped over and broke his front teeth on the bonnet of a car in the blackout. He couldn't see it. And he never got the embouchure back then, you know, that you need for playing. He could still play trumpet, but never had the tone that he'd had before, you know. But yeah, and my mum played piano. She'd been trained as a concert pianist, and she actually finished that because her mum and dad, my grandmother and grandfather, died early. My mum was 14 when she was left without a mother and father, but she took a job. Her person who was teaching her to play concert piano saw her doing this job in Woolworths, demonstrating sheet music on a piano when they used to sell sheet music, and it was a big thing. And she refused to teach her anymore. She said, that is disgusting that you're playing that sort of music. But she carried on and got her own dance band and used to go out playing for weddings and things and night schools for old time dancing. So they were both involved with the business, really. So we're really pleased when my brother and I got started, you know. But the first thing we did was make a record for Pi Records. We signed a recording contract with Pi. A great guy called Michael Black was our agent, whose brother actually is the great lyricist Don Black. Michael died a couple of years ago, but a lovely man. He was our agent, and he took us to Pi Records, and we signed the contract and made a record, and Jimmy Page played guitar on our first record. I mean, unbelievable. Yeah. And I met Jimmy Page some years later, many years later, at a function for Jim Marshall, you know, of Marshall Amplification. And I went up to Jimmy, I said, I know you played on a lot of records in the 60s, but you played on mine. It was called Take Me Where the Sun Shines. He said, doesn't matter how many I played on, come on, let's have a photograph together. So I've got a great photograph with Jimmy Page. He's a lovely guy. And then when the record wasn't a hit, we quickly turned to comedy.
I was going to say that. Where did the comedy actually begin with you two? Were you always funny together, you and your brother?
Not really. We used to sing together a lot. I remember when our dad bought us a reel-to-reel tape recorder, we'd spend all night singing songs and loved doing all that stuff. You know?
Your
so that's
first
why...
couple of Panto bookings were as singers, not comedians.
Yeah, we were singing villagers in the first 2 pantomimes at Bath. So our spot was all songs, you know. And then slowly we started putting a joke in between the songs, which we stole from anyone and everyone, the jokes. But we found we liked the sound of laughter. It sounds a bit twee now, I suppose, but we really did. Slowly we'd put more gags in and then started thinking up our own sort of little routines to put in. And that began to take over. We dropped songs to make room for comedy, and slowly, within about 4 or 5 years, we'd become a sort of out-and-out comedy double act. You know?
But also what's quite interesting is you weren't the funny one to start.
No, it was the other way around. I was the straight man and Alan was the comic. And I don't know how we agreed to change that, but slowly it sort of evolved into the other way round, and we found that was more successful for us, really. We won Opportunity Knocks in the early 70s, I think that was. And then we went on to Search for a Star some years later and won our heat on that, and were pulled out of a 10-week pantomime to record the final of Search for a Star on London Weekend Television. And a guy called Dave Wolfe won it. The great Paul Squire came second, and my brother and I came third, and we suddenly found out that coming third didn't do you any good whatsoever. So we'd lost a 10-week pantomime with Basil Brush and Bert Whedon at Sunderland Empire to make way for this one telly. And we were out of work for 10 weeks.
Oh, that's a shame, isn't it?
Yeah, but no, great days. It's been a very interesting career, I must say, and all these amazing pantomimes. As I say, I think I've done great summer seasons, I've done great other shows, cabaret shows and things, and tellies, but pantomime is really my first love. I do still enjoy the thrill of being in a panto.
Was it difficult, though, being away from home over the years?
Yeah, I suppose it was really, especially with Fran. Actually, when we did summer seasons and things, she'd come away with us and get a job in the area. And then she started doing pantomime. She worked for our great mates Pavlov's Puppets, who were in Swansea with us in 1970. After we got friendly with them, they lived down in Smarden in Kent and still live there. But they gave Fran work. She worked as one half of Pavlov's Puppets, because they put several acts into different shows, you know. So Alan and Brenda, who actually are the act, they'd be somewhere, and then they'd put 2 other people doing the same act in another show. So Fran did Hull with us when we were with the great Nat Jackley, another great, amazing man. And then the following year we did Norwich with Richard Bryars, and Fran was in that one as well as Pavlov's Puppets. And then she also did the Norman Wisdom Christmas show, which I mentioned earlier, and so she did a lot of work like that. But so we were together a lot of the time. And then of course Ben came along,
ruined it for everyone.
Ruined it all.
No, I must have made it harder because my mum stayed at home with me and made sure I was okay. And then obviously I've never really thought about it too much. How it must have been quite hard. You keep going away for sort of 2-3 months at a time, particularly over Christmas. When you're older now, I don't have any kids, but my wife's a choreographer, Hayley, and we have done a couple of pantos together, but she does her own thing as well. So strangely, the years we've been in Lytham St Anne's up near Blackpool, my wife's been in Portsmouth, so we haven't been able to get much further away from each other.
Yeah, she choreographs the show at Portsmouth.
Yeah.
But what theatre is that?
Theatre Royal in Portsmouth.
Yeah.
But when you're in pantomime, basically Christmas Day is one day off, you know, and there's a whole huge build-up, and you appreciate everyone around the country is having however long they have for Christmas, and it's a holiday season, but you basically have a day off from the show and you're back to it on Boxing Day. But I can remember not just being excited about Christmas, when I was a kid being excited that Dad was coming home from whatever panto had been staying away.
Now he couldn't care less.
I'm like, oh, Dad's here again, great.
I'm just thinking, one of those things when you're in pantomime as well, the dressing room becomes like a second home, you know, and it's really, because you spend more time in the dressing room than you do in your digs, really. And all your cards, all the good luck cards and Christmas cards all over the mirrors and everything. This year in Lytham St Anne's, or last year now it was, Lytham St Anne's, won't mention any names, but we had quite a big name coming to the theatre to do one night, and we all had to clear our dressing rooms for them. So we left our pictures up, our cards up on the mirror and everything, and did the thing, bit of a tradition, got a bottle of wine and left for this artist and a note. And when we went back into our dressing room next day, all the cards had been taken down off our mirrors and put in drawers. The wine had gone and our note had been ignored. So I was really unhappy about that, and I won't mention who it was, but
we can work it out.
well, if you look back at who was visiting Lytham St Anne's, but it's one of those things, you know. As I say, the dressing room is really an important place for you at that time. So to have someone just ruin it like that spoils it.
But equally the other way round, it's nice, that tradition of, you don't get it so much in Panto because a lot of theatres don't have other shows in while the Panto's on, but in summer shows and things, you'd have Sunday concerts and different artists coming in, and you just leave a note for people who are mates and they'd leave one back and stuff.
Yeah,
you know.
that's right. Yeah.
Summer seasons, they've all but gone.
Yeah,
They really have. I mean, we were lucky enough to do the one that's still going, Chroma Pier. I did. Actually, I think I've topped the bill there more than anyone else. Someone told me the other day. 6 times, yeah. Did the second ever Seaside special for Dick Condon. The first year was Milliken and Nesbitt, who'd won Opportunity Knocks, and the second year, my brother and I, the Simmons brothers, topped the bill there. And then Alan and I went back in the 90s and did 3 years there. And then you and I did 2 years there in
2009 and 10.
Yeah. And great. You know, what summer shows are all about, really, that was. But it's sad, as you say, because now they don't exist anywhere else, practically.
But
and I remember doing a
know.
20-week summer season. You know, you do a 20-week summer, a 12-week pantomime, and that was most of the year taken care of work-wise. You know?
It might come back again. I mean, probably not to the same extent, but there is an appetite for sort of variety again, I think, and show that you see a few shows in theatres now with builders' variety shows and music hall shows and things. So who knows, with Brexit and things, it might get harder to go to Europe.
Don't mention that word.
No, but who knows what's going to happen with that. But more people might go to resorts in the UK again. And
that's
you might
true.
get more
and
shows
build it up again. But of course, the thing that's happened with pantomime as well, now it's not only at Christmas, is it? They do a summer pantomime and Easter pantomimes. Yeah. So that's sort of spreading around. You did a summer tour with a panto.
Yeah,
didn't you?
I did a tour for Kudos with a musical of a potted version of Boogie Nights, going around Haven camps, and then some days within the week we'd do Aladdin as well. And they didn't call it Abanazar, they were going for the Disney version, so I was Jafar at the time.
Oh,
so
you were the baddie.
It's the only time I've ever played a baddie. It was quite funny.
Yes.
I caused uproar in one part because I put on the park mascot's furry hands just as a gag in one show, and it upset a lot of the entertainment team, apparently.
Oh yes, don't ever.
No, I learned.
I know that you're not allowed to see the mascot being,
exactly.
being created, shall I say?
Yes, yeah.
Spoiler alert, but there's somebody inside it.
But I was just making out that something grotesque had happened to my hands. I wasn't trying to ruin the mascot, but they took it like that. I was trying to undermine.
What's the thing, as directors, we always tell people, don't touch other people's props.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, they're very important to that person.
I was young and naive and needed the money. No, it doesn't.
Have you ever worked then, Keith, with any mischievous artists over the years?
Oh yes, a few.
We had before. I think I know what you'd say first of all, but there was one time. Obviously, I know this happens in a lot of shows where there are little sort of things the company do to keep it interesting, and as long as it doesn't come across to the audience, it's not harmful, then fine. When we did pantomime at the Hall in Crawley, we worked with Malcolm Lord as the Dame, who'd done a lot of understudying John Inman as Dame, and he worked quite like John Inman, but he's a brilliant Dame in his own right. But he was Bungle on Rainbow for Zippy, George and Bungle of quite a lot of the series of that.
We used to have people come to the stage door, but you've got Bungle in your pantomime, and wait for him to get his autograph. How can you prove you were Bungle? No one ever saw you, you know.
And
but he was, Malcolm. He's a great guy.
Like your fantastic Panto podcast memorabilia, Malcolm Lord had some Bungle memorabilia, and he had a Bungle pencil top. And for some reason, I don't even know how it started, someone brought it on stage and had to shake hands with someone on stage and passed them this pencil top. Then it became a game. As long as the audience didn't know, you had to pass it around in a scene, and you could only pass it. There were proper rules and everything. You could only pass it once in a scene. So if you got it passed to you in the finale and finished the show with it, you had to buy everyone something in the green room, like biscuits or cakes. So that was a bit mischievous, but it wasn't coming across on stage.
No. I mean, I have a thing as director. I used to go around and say no messing about on the last night, you know, because people have come to see this pantomime who haven't seen it before, so let's keep it as we always do it. And I remember one year with Dick Whittington, Chris Akabusi was King Rat's henchman in it, John Nettle's henchman he was. And lovely guy, Chris Akabusi. And I'd been round most of the dressing rooms, and I knocked on his dressing room door to tell him this, don't mess about, Chris. And as I opened the door, he was blowing up an inflatable shark. He had an inflatable octopus and an inflatable something else, which I'd never seen any of these things before. I knew he was going to take them on stage with him every entrance. So I just looked at it all and I said, don't worry, Chris, all right, I closed the door. So I knew whatever I said, it would still happen. But a very, very funny guy, lovely man.
When we worked in Derby, we did 5 years at the Assembly Rooms in Derby, and there was a male dancer in that show called Lee Thompson. And he was a really sort of larger-than-life character. He was sort of the heart and soul of the company. He was a hilarious bloke and liked being outrageous. Yeah. And he didn't really sort of muck about during the show, but he'd go a bit over the top sometimes. And he had to do a move in a routine where he'd sort of do a double cartwheel with another guy. So he had to put his hands on his legs and do a cartwheel over. He mistimed it and hit his head on this guy's knee and got a big sort of nosebleed and a gash on his face and stuff. But he was a pirate in the show, and I remember him sort of always being a bit crazy, being a pirate and stuff. Yeah.
But no, anyone who you're not going to hear about anyone who upset me. There were a few of them, I have to say.
We don't want the salacious gossip on the podcast. No. We'll find that out afterwards.
Yeah.
So sorry, listeners.
I normally say to people, you know, that in a pantomime company there can be one fly in the ointment, and it's normally me. But
I've found since we've been working together, actually, because you do become almost like a little family in your own little bubble during Panto, and it's a shame that the runs are getting a bit squeezed together and a bit shorter now. Like the last few years we've ended up working a total of about 6 weeks, but if you're in a pantomime where the actual performances last 6 weeks, by the time you've rehearsed it as well, so it's a couple of months, isn't it? And usually the whole company gets quite close and you sort of become mates. In fact, we're organising now a reunion for a company we worked with in 2010, and a few times over the years we sort of stayed a bit closer than even some of the others, and we've met up for drinks with a few people, but we're trying to sort that out because it's 10 years since we worked together, we've got a little WhatsApp group going and people saying I'm going to make it and stuff. And it's nice when you think, even now the people we just worked with in Lytham St Anne's, you think, we want to meet up again. And
we'll have a reunion with them as well.
For the most part, you know, working with people that closely, you feel like they're good friends, don't you, by the end of it?
Yeah, definitely.
And it's weird, you might not see them again for a long time, but you've always got stories and memories that bring you together. You know?
Yeah. One of the greats I remember working with, who became a great friend as well, because I did a load of shows with him, was Ken Dodd. Only ever did one pantomime, that was Dick Whittington at the Alexandra Theatre in Birmingham in 1980, I think it was, 80 or 81. And what a great man, just to stand in the wings and watch him. I did loads of one-nighters with him on other shows, the Simmons brothers did. and we did a radio series with him as well on Radio 2, Ken Dodd's Palace of Laughter. And he was just, it was brilliant to watch him work, because I've never seen anyone else get the audience quite like that. And he used to have a line in his act, actually, when he'd say to the audience, "Do you give in?" Because they were laughing so much. It did hurt you know?
I'd seen him many times.
Really, yeah.
And he'd get everybody laughing.
Yeah. It was amazing.
It was his challenge.
Yes, it was. And of course, famous for going on for a long time. The first time I got to meet him was when he was on Skegness Pier in 1975. Alan and I were working the summer season at Derbyshire Miners Holiday Centre. And Fran went to see him first, and she came back, she said, "You've got to go and see Ken Dodd on the pier." She said, "He's absolutely brilliant." And we started going up there after our show, and eventually got to know him and go in the dressing room and have chats. But we'd come out of the theatre, and he was the only one left. He'd have the keys to the pier, and we walked down the pier in darkness, and he'd lock up the pier because no one else would stay.
He didn't care though, did he? That was the thing.
Well, his big thing was he was giving people value for money, which he really was, actually. Yeah. But that pantomime we did in the Alex, we finished every night at 10 o'clock. He had his clock. He was told it had to finish at 10. There were sort of monetary things with it. So he had his clock from the kitchen in Knotty Ash, and it was in the pit, and every night at a minute to 10, the curtain would come down.
He had such affection, though, for you and your brother as well.
Yeah, he really did. He was. I was speaking to him up until just a few weeks before he died. Actually, he used to phone and gave me some really good advice about various things as well. He was a genuinely lovely man. And another emotional thing this year, my 50th pantomime, Lady Anne, his widow, came to see us in the show at Lytham St Anne's. She drove up from Liverpool to see it, and she's smashing. She used to do shows with us. She was the fairy with us at the Alex in that Dick Whittington. There, she was known as Sibby Jones then, but now she's Lady Anne, and great, a very lovely lady. Yeah, smashing.
What was it like then when you found out you'd have to go solo?
Terrifying, actually. When Alan packed it in, he was offered a full-time job with a company called Rainbow, who put out costume characters like Bob the Builder and I can't think of it.
Postman Pat,
all those things.
Stuff.
So he was offered to be their events manager, and he phoned me up and said, "Look, I've been offered this full-time job." I mean, we were still doing pantomimes and summer seasons, but I was doing a lot of writing as well, especially for Brian Connolly. I was writing for all his television shows, so I was earning quite a lot of money as well as the stuff we were doing as the Simmons brothers. And so Alan had been offered this job and said, "I think I'm going to have to say we'll knock the act on the head." So I accepted that. And then the first panto was with John Nettles again, actually, in Peter Pan at Plymouth. And suddenly, on my own. And John actually said to me, he said, "I don't want to become half of a double act with you. I'm not going to do any of that stuff." I said, "No, okay, I accept that." So I got away with it in that panto. But the next year, it was, again, a Peter Pan, but it was with Tim Healy at Newcastle. And Paul Elliott said to me, "Would you do your Magic Cabinet routine," which was a Simmons Brothers routine. And so I had to teach it to Tim Healy. And as Ben said earlier, Tim said, "God, that is so difficult to learn, that thing." Anyway, we did it. But I used to go in his dressing room most days and go through it with him before we went on stage, just to remind him.
He still talks about it now, doesn't he? He sent a message to congratulate Dad on his 50 pantos. He said, "I always remember the box." He calls it the box. Like it was a harrowing memory.
Yeah, and then the following year, it was Peter Pan at the Mayflower Theatre, and I was Smee the pirate. Paul Nicholas was Captain Hook, and the great Geoffrey Hughes, one of the loveliest men you could wish to meet, who'd been Eddie Yates in Coronation Street and Onslow in Keeping Up Appearances, and he was Twiggy in the Royal Family.
Yes.
What a lovely guy. And he was Smee the pirate, I was Starkey the pirate, and he did the cabinet routine with me. And he used to say to me, "I don't know how you learn this thing." He said, it's a terrible routine to learn. But they were the three I did on my own, and although I enjoyed it, it was never the same as being a proper double act. I always felt that's what I really am, part of the double, and that's why I talked Ben into joining me.
How did that conversation go then?
What, with Ben?
Yeah.
I can't remember the exact details of it, but I remember Dad saying to me, you know all this stuff that people are finding it so hard to learn, let's just try and work it. And it had never even occurred to me to even want to do it, to think about it. And I thought, yeah, it's a good point. And
I think he actually thought, do I want to work with this old man?
well, and when we started doing it, I did quite enjoy it, and it was really funny when we first started doing shows together. Like I say, we did this sort of tryout one at the Water Rats pub in King's Cross, and then we did a few one-nighters. We did a few music hall shows for Jan Hunt, Dougie Chapman.
Yeah.
I remember doing a one-nighter. We did a few charity shows for the Water Rats as well, at the Stevenage, the Kenneth Moore in Ilford.
Yeah.
And it was really funny, not in a patronising way, in a supportive way, because they knew I'd just started doing it. People were constantly coming up to me and saying, you should do it like this, or you want to work like that, or you want to work like that. And I can't remember who it was, but I remember someone saying to me, Alan was always much harder to Keith. Because he's your dad, you're almost being a bit too nice to him. And that's one of the things I really did sort of take on board. And it sort of developed more and more. And I can be quite harsh to him on stage. But it's funny how within about sort of a couple of years, people stopped sort of giving me advice, and it made me feel like, I must be getting it right now. It was like they were being supportive, but something wasn't quite right when we first started working together compared to how it used to be with you and Alan.
Yeah,
and then it was nice when that stopped and people just sort of accepted it, and now we've become sort of established. And like you say, I know you've always been a double act, but it's like you do. I can see you feel better when you're doing anything together, like the writing, the performing, the directing, rather than even being on your own for any part.
Well, it's great being with someone else, because if it all dies, I can blame you. If I'm on my own, I've got no chance.
The sound of walking off with two sets of footsteps, isn't it? Yeah, not your own.
And that has happened, believe me.
No. Have there been any tough places that you performed there?
Yeah, certainly not in pantomime. I mean, we've always had great things in Panto, but we have had some tough shows in place.
All performers and a lot of comics particularly talk about dying somewhere, and I remember thinking when we started working together, I'm so lucky to come into an established act where you know it works. You're not really sort of trying anything out like that, and obviously we've adapted things and we have put in new things since we've been working together. But they're old sort of tried and tested routines, even now, are going to cause fits of laughter for people, and that's brilliant. There's one gig we did, I won't say where it was, but we were booked to do a stag gig, like an all men. And I remember Dad saying to the promoter, we don't do that kind of thing. And they went, no, they don't want it to be rude or anything. They just want clean things. And it was like nobody cared at all at what we were doing. It's the only time in my life we've finished performing and walked off to virtual silence. And that Dad could see the look in my eyes of the sort of, what has just happened? What is that? Because obviously many performers have been through that numerous times, but it was the only time I can really remember it.
A lovely story, the Punch and Judy man, John Stiles. I don't know if you, great guy, John. And he told me a story that there was an American comedian who, when he actually passed away, as his coffin went by, it said on the side of the coffin, "This is not the first time I've died." Which I thought was a great line. In fact, it gave me the idea of writing a book for charity, or compiling a book for charity, with all those sorts of stories from various acts and people, you know. I just met the other night, who I hadn't seen for ages, a guy called Dale Warren, used to work as Dale Warren and Gloria, and him and Gloria were at a party Fran and I were at the other night. And some of the stories Dale told me, there was a guy, the agent phoned him and said, "I want you to go to Cardiff and do a gig." He said, "I'm not travelling all the way to Cardiff." He said, that's ridiculous. He said, "Not for the money you're paying me." He said, all right, I'll give you a gig in Bristol. Is that all right?" He said, "Yeah, that's better." So he drove to Bristol, and when he got to Bristol to the venue, bloke said, "We've had a phone call, the show's been cancelled here, you've got to go on to Cardiff." What a great way to get someone to do a gig. Lovely, a Dale Warren story.
And the agents as well that you must have worked with over the years.
Yeah, brilliant. Some really, I mean, as I said, Michael Black was our first ever agent. And he was famous for auditioning Tommy Steele many years before, and actually said to Tommy Steele, "No, guitar acts are on the way out. Forget it." But we were with him. We were only with him for a year. Then we joined a guy called Johnny Risco, who booked us. He was the first one to book us for Pantomime. Actually, he put us in at the Panto at Bath. We were with Johnny for a few years, and then for a while we were with a great guy called Peter Elliott, who was Dick Emery's agent, and we were with him for some time as well. And then we went with Johnny Manns, the man who managed and looked after Dorman Wisdom, of course, and that's how really I got to know Norman very well, and did 11 tours with him.
The biggest character of an agent you had was Dave Forrester, though, wasn't it?
That was the greatest. Dave Forrester, who was Ken Dodd's agent. Ken Dodd, as I said earlier, met him in Skegness, and he eventually spoke to Dave Forrester and got us on Dave Forrester's book. So Dave became our agent. And Dave is a bit of a legend in the business. He used to speak like this. I can't do a great impression. I go, "Hello, boys, how are you? Okay." And when Ken phoned me and said, "I'd like you to do this radio series, Ken Dodd's Palace of Laughter," he said, "But don't tell Dave that I've organised this, but come up and read for the producer, Ron McDonnell, in Manchester." So we went up, read, and Ron said, "Yeah, great lads. We'll have you on the whole series, 6 episodes." So then Ken took me aside. He said, "Right, don't tell Dave I organised this, but he'll phone you in a few days and make out he got this for you. So don't let on." So I had to put up with our agent ringing me and saying, "Guess what I've got for you?" I said, "No, what, Dave?" He said, "It's a radio series with someone very close to you." I said, "No, who is it, Dave?" And he kept me hanging on. "It's Ken Dodd." I said, "Oh, fantastic." And what was worse, having to make out that he'd done it, was that we had to pay him commission.
I was going to say, yeah, did you have to pay him the commission?
Yeah. But he was a great agent. He also had Mike Yarwood, the impressionist. He was on his books at the time. So we did a lot of great work through Dave Forrester. Yeah, he was an incredible man, actually.
All these pantomimes you've written then, are there subjects that are harder to write for, stories?
There's some I don't like so much. Goldilocks and the Three Bears is always a difficult one for me, because now, I don't know how it used to be, but now they set it in a circus. It's like a circus story, and actually that was the case. Frank Bruno was going to do it at the Dominion Tottenham Court Road for, I don't know if it was E&B then or it had turned to Kudos, but Paul Elliott rang me and I was writing this one, and he said, so Frank Bruno is the ringmaster. I said, right, and he said, and Sooty is the storyteller. I said, right. And I put the phone down, and then I thought, hang on, Sooty never speaks. So I phoned Paul back. I said, how can he be the storyteller? He said, well, he will whisper in Frank's ear, and Frank will say the lines. So I had to write this down too, but that worked out all right. But that's not an easy one to write. And I've written a couple of Robinson Crusoes as well, but that's not done so much these days. And the very first pantomime I did was Puss in Boots at Bath, and then 3 years later we were at Swansea and we did Puss in Boots again with a really old comic called Derek Roy, who had been a big name in the 50s. And Puss in Boots is one that's not done much these days. And not long ago I was talking to Alan and Brenda of Pavlov's Puppets, who were in that Swansea pantomime with us, and none of us can remember the story of Puss in Boots, really. Not correctly. I know there's the Marquis of Caraboss and this cat that can talk and helps one of the miller's sons. There's 3 miller's sons, I think, but I've got to check up on the story of Puss in Boots in case anyone asks me to write one again.
There are the kind of classic pantomime stories that everybody's more familiar with, like the ones that are performed most frequently now. I guess Cinderella, Aladdin, Jack and the Beanstalk,
and Dick Whittington, really.
Yeah.
They're the 4,
and
I
then
suppose.
you get Mother Goose is less popular now. you don't get Babes in the Wood done so much, although you've always said that was the best, most enjoyable one.
It's the best one for a double act, Babes in the Wood, because you have the good and bad robbers. Well, good and bad robbers, really, and it's a great part, a good, really good comedy part, but not many producers want to do it now because of the connotation of Babes in the Wood. It's all a bit, sadly, so it's gone the wrong way. Though they do put it on as Robin Hood now. I've done Robin Hood with the Babes in the Wood, or just Robin Hood, but it's still the same sort of story.
But then you also get now what haven't traditionally been considered pantomimes that are, because they're done so much, like Peter Pan and Beauty and the Beast and stuff like that,
which weren't classed as pantos,
really sort of musical plays before that, and have now become pantomimes. But we did a Sleeping Beauty together but that didn't feel difficult to do or write, really.
The most unusual one I've done was Jack and Jill at Bath. We did a pantomime of Jack and Jill with one of the most pathetic hills you've ever seen for Jack to fall down. It was just a slight gradient.
How does that even become a story that can last any length of time? They go up a hill and come back down.
And Little Bo Peep and her sheep did that, and we had 4 real sheep come on the stage.
Oh my goodness!
And I always remember Bill, the one sheep that was like the leader of them was called Bill, and he used to always walk down to the footlights and sort of look out at the audience as though he was counting the house. But that was amazing. And actually, Roy Hudd told me not long ago he did a Little Bo Peep and her sheep as well, but I've never heard of it being done since, actually. So that's quite a rare one.
Humpty Dumpty's coming back this year in Newcastle.
Right.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I've never written a Humpty Dumpty or been in one.
I think the last person to perform it and write it was Keith Harris.
Oh, really? Oh, yes, of course. Yeah,
With
he
Orville
did do
was-
that. Yeah.
Well, you know, it's got to have a wall in it, and otherwise anything goes.
And an egg.
But not necessarily in that order. Keith Harris. My brother Alan's just done a compilation of all the telly spots we did over the years, and we did the Keith Harris show and did our spot on it, but I'd totally forgotten when I saw this. We then did a routine with Keith and Cuddles afterwards, a mind-reading bit, which I'd totally forgotten we ever did. It was just lovely to see it again. Another great guy, Keith Harris, and we did 3 summer seasons with him, but he was one of those. He did the longest running. I think it's still in the Guinness Book of Records as the longest running pantomime ever. They were throwing out Easter eggs to the audience during a panto. Yeah, amazing.
But we did a tribute show to him, didn't we? Organised by another Brother Water act, Steve Hewlett, in 2019.
Yeah.
That was at the Viva Cabaret Rooms in Blackpool, and that was a great night.
Yeah,
and they
excellent.
lit up Blackpool Tower in green to
Yeah,
represent
for
Orville.
Yeah. And who did we share a dressing room with there? The Crankies.
Crankies, the Grumbleweeds,
Jimmy
and Jimmy
Cricket,
Cricket,
yeah,
and Bobby
yeah.
Crush.
Yeah, that's right.
That was an interesting dressing room.
Great
But
night.
Keith Harris did a great gag on My Dad and Uncle when they worked together. That was in Blackpool, wasn't it?
No, it was.
Was it Weymouth?
It was in. No, it was in Blackpool. The Sandcastle in Blackpool. Yeah.
Yeah.
We got in one day and he said, "There's someone in your dressing room to see you." I said, "Oh." He said, "I hope you don't mind me letting him in." He said, "No." When we opened our dressing room door, he'd got a donkey off the beach and just put it in our dressing room. Great moment.
And did it?
No.
No. Oh, thank goodness for that.
Fortunately, it was fine.
Yeah. We quickly got it out.
What kind of things are you bringing towards the act? Because obviously you're in the nicest possible way. You're a younger man.
Yeah.
You've been exposed to different kinds of humour
Yeah,
that your
sure.
dad would have been.
It's funny because you go and see pantomimes now, and I think there's a lot more what I would call risque humour than when I was a kid. And I know Dad's really against that. He doesn't like it at all. Anything that could be seen to be a bit close to the line or a bit rude or stuff. And you go and see pantos at Palladium, and they're incredible, lavish spectacles. But obviously, by the nature of having Julian Clary in it, you're going to get a lot of that kind of material. But I think as long as it doesn't upset kids or cause any sort of awkward moments for parents with kids going, "What was that all about?" and stuff, I think you can have that. If something goes over kids' heads, you can have a little bit of nearer the knuckle humour maybe. But also with the sort of embracing modern technology and stuff like that, and I always try and get more current references into things. So since we've been writing together, I've always tried to get in events that are going on, but referring to social media and referring to newer technology and stuff like that. Like we wrote, or I had the idea, but we wrote a scene in our Panto of Aladdin just gone where now Amazon Alexas and Google Home Assistants and whatever, and Siri is all prevalent. Widow Twanky had a home assistant called Twanky's Twonk, and it was the humour you can get out of that going wrong and stuff. And so I'm naturally trying to find those kind of things that you can put into scripts as well. I think.
No,
So,
it works though, and I agree. You do bring a sort of much more modern feel to the things we're writing now.
Yeah. But I'm aware. Thank you for I'm a younger man, Hayden. I appreciate that. But I'm aware that I'm not going to be younger forever, so I need to befriend some more youthful people to keep me up to date with technology and stuff.
Don't look in my direction, because honestly, just...
Great.
It must, though, have been, for you, quite the change, not only as a performer, but also as well for things like car journeys, to have your boy with you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it is. It has made a huge difference to me actually, and his outlook on life, really. I suppose it's because I always hark back to that first pantomime. Jimmy Mack, who I mentioned earlier, him and the guy Peter Dare, who were doing routines with him, at rehearsals they'd say, "Let's do the old so-and-so routine," or no one ever said, "Let's do a new routine here." It was always, "Let's do the old," and I thought, you always hark back to those old things, but now with Ben it's like, let's think up something new, like we did the last year, the year before in Lytham, we did the Wicked Queen,
Snow White,
where in the original productions she asks the guy who's supposed to kill Snow White to bring her heart in a box, and we thought that's a bit horrible now, so we changed the whole idea and got him to film it. Let's film
it on a mobile phone.
Make out I'm killing Snow White, and we'll film it and then show the Queen that. So that modernised it totally, but also gave us a chance. I used to get two people up out the audience to be extras in the film, and they'd have to stand there and react to Ben, who was the henchman.
We get a lot of laughs because I was fake killing Snow White, he's supposed to be filming it, and then we'd have these people out the audience as extras not really knowing what to do, and then we'd say, "Cut, that was rubbish, you're not showing enough anger and fear or anything." But then there was one guy, he really went for it, so Dad would have a go at the extras and say, "You've got to give it more, I need more," like he was a Hollywood director or something. Then we do another take, and one of these guys out the audience would sort of pick me up, got me on the floor, was bundling me, sort of, and it was very
brought the
fun.
place down. It was lovely, So it was another nice, a new idea to put into the Panto.
We try to do that, don't we? It's nice to have a familiarity with a script and you know the structure of it, but then we'll always try and find something new you can put in that hasn't necessarily been done before. Like this year just gone, I put in a scene. We originally wrote a scene for Aladdin where he's going to be executed and then Abanazar saves him, so he ends up sort of owing Abanazar. And it used to be you'd have an executioner with a big axe or something, and then Abanazar freezes everybody. But we had Aladdin asked for a last request to sing a song and sings "A Million Green Bottles Hanging on the Wall." And we did this thing where it would keep going to darkness, coming back up, and gradually everyone had got older and grown beards while he's singing this song. But we thought we'd done that about 3 or 4 times. And I came up with an idea of he wants to play Countdown. And because Countdown's reached a whole new generation now, because you get the sort of tea time people watching it, and then you got that 8 out of 10 Cats does Countdown. And so we had this ludicrous prop made with a countdown letters board and a conundrum on it and stuff, and we incorporated all that into it. And again, that's never been done before, and it's quite nice
worked
to
really well,
come up with new things all the time.
Yeah.
Does it make you feel younger then?
It makes me feel younger. Unfortunately, I don't look younger. That's the only trouble.
Well, you must have noticed it gets harder to sort of learn the new stuff.
Oh, it really does now, yes. We did one routine. It's an old Abbott and Costello routine called Who's on Third Base, the baseball thing.
Oh, yes.
And we rewrote that to be for the policeman. And it was we're going to search houses, who's in number 3, who's in number 5, who's in number 7, and it's a very involved thing, and I had to start learning that in August last year. But I was almost word perfect with it by the time we started.
Yeah, definitely.
But I do like those kind of routines as well. Yeah.
So you've got the comedy, the magic. Anything else that you wish you could have brought or would still like to bring into the act?
Yeah, well, this year actually it didn't work all that well, but we released a song called Pantomime, an original song, which we made available on Spotify and all those outlets.
Download places.
Downloads. We said we'd give all the download money to Dementia UK, just because I got involved with that, the London Marathon last year. Great friend of ours, Tanya Franks, the actress who's in EastEnders. Her and some of the EastEnders cast ran for Dementia because of Barbara Windsor. So we said we'd give the money from this record, but I'm a bit ashamed to send it in at the moment because it didn't raise much money for us yet. But we're hoping next year to re-release it again because it's a Christmas song, all about pantomime.
I'll put a little link on the bottom of this episode so people can have a download.
If you search, anywhere you get your music from, if you search Pantomime, Simmons and Simmons, you'll find this track, and it is. Dad wrote it some years ago, came back to it again a bit more recently, and then we tweaked it together a little bit. But it's basically his stuff, and it is excellent. And you'd hope over the next few years it can become a song that's just associated with pantomime,
And hopefully it'll do better next time round.
I think
get
it
word
might.
around.
Great. Thanks, Hayden. Could I have that in writing?
Of course you can. And if you want to do a Just Giving link, I'll put that on as well, because anything to help the cause. And obviously it's very sad what's with Barbara. Because so many people have said so many lovely things.
Yeah, and another great pantomime artist. She did some great pantos, and just a lovely lady. So I feel very
never
sad.
poo-pooed the art form either. Never poo-pooed the art
No,
form.
that's right. As a few do, I'm afraid. That's the sad thing about it.
That's always annoyed me a little bit, and also not just that, but when you tell your friends who don't really know too much about the industry, I'm going away to do panto, and they'll just go, "It's behind you," or "Oh no, you're not," and you're like, "Yeah, that's funny," but basically what it involves, and certainly I have a new appreciation of it since we've been writing and directing. You're putting on a full-scale 2-hour, sometimes 2.5-hour musical production, usually in less than 2 weeks. And it can be quite involved. You think the amount of work that goes into it, the people that are employed during that time because of it, and the people that are learning their craft, the people that are, getting to do what they love, and all the parts that come together. I've always enjoyed the sort of team aspect of putting on a production. And everyone coming together, the dancers, the musicians, the theatre staff, the crew, and all the performers. It's actually a unique kind of art form that you don't get anywhere else. Other musical productions that are going to be in theatres for months will have 3-4 months rehearsals.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's so true. And we always try to instill in when we're directing, the things that pantomime requires. It needs you to attack. You can't just wander on stage and do something. You need to come on with purpose and really have a go at it and take it seriously. Treat it like a real story kind of thing. Really, only the comic can mess about with it, actually. And everyone, although we give people like Abanaza, we give him some funny lines, but he's still an evil character and it still works like that. But if everyone treats it as a real piece of drama, and I think the audience go for it more.
You can tell when someone's doing it and thinking, I don't have to worry about this, I can just muck around for it and enjoy myself for a couple of weeks. And they're like, whilst I appreciate that attitude in that, all right, we're not doing a Chekhov play and we're not doing a West End musical, but equally it is an important thing and people are paying to come and be entertained. If you're just going to muck about in it, people are going to realise you're not taking it seriously enough.
To direct people then who've kind of walked it, have you had experienced that before?
Yeah, a few. Because we like writing rhyming couplets for the baddies and the goodie. Normally we do that, and we spend a lot of time over those and get the meterage just right.
That's something that really bothers me, actually. I've seen a lot of pantomimes and read other scripts where people seem to think if you just have the words at the end of each line rhyme. You've written a rhyming couplet, and we always try and be quite meticulous in getting the exact right number of
pentameter.
Exactly.
That's the word. I wish I'd thought of that, and I will in future.
I'm just being. That's Miss Dick, my old English teacher. Thank you for that. It's the only thing I remember.
No, it's brilliant. That. Yeah, people. So we write these rhyming couplets and spend a lot of time over them. And then you get annoyed when people don't do it as it's written. You know, they start adding their own words in or dropping a word out, and that gets very annoying. And you find yourself pulling people up on that sort of thing. You know,
and it is quite difficult as well from a directorial point of view, because not many people who direct pantomimes and are then in them are the comedy characters as well. Like, I know of several people that do it that are the more serious kind of statesman-like characters, like the King or something like that. And so to say to people you can't muck about and then be the comedy characters who are mucking about, and sometimes you'll work with other people who want to be funny and throw extra lines in, and that's fine, ad-libs and things that get laughs, but you can see people adding bits in, and it's difficult to then say, oh, don't do that, but they're like, well, you're doing it. You know?
Yeah, but you must allow people to ad-lib in pantomime, I think.
Yeah.
We had one director many years ago, the Ashcroft Theatre at Croydon, with Richard Bryars and Arthur English and Peter Goodright, Suzanne Danielle. It was a great panto. And our dressing room, Alan and I were in the dressing room, and beneath us was Peter Goodright and Arthur English. And the director came in one night, and over the tannoy, he said to all the dressing rooms, you've got to control it, people. I counted 17 ad-libs tonight. That's not good. And all we got was Peter Goodright had a broomstick, and he banged on the ceiling to us. He's in again, and he's moaning.
Well, that's another thing. It's interesting as directors. Most shows have a director that directs and then leaves the production, and everyone can kind of relax a little bit and get on with it. And you don't want anyone to be on edge because you're in the show. So we always do try and say, once it's open, once it's settled down, as long as there are no major issues, we'll kind of hand over the responsibility of the show to the company manager, and just want everyone to treat you like you're a regular company member in it then. But there's always going to be that kind of, well, they're the director, isn't it?
Yeah, but we get away with it.
Have either of you ever thought about serious acting?
Well, I have, definitely, because I did quite a bit of it before we worked together. I did sort of fringe plays and things. I went to drama school, and it was a musical theatre course as well. And I did a couple of pantomimes on my own before I worked with Dad. I played Buttons in Cinderella at Luton, and I played Clarence Casanova in Beauty and the Beast at Rotherham. But obviously those are pantomimes. But I thought
you were playing the Beast, actually.
Yeah, thanks. But I'm always keen to do other things as well. And I've only about 2 or 3 years ago I did a play in Camden at a fringe theatre with a friend of mine and stuff. So, and you did I don't think you ever think of yourself as a serious actor, but you did it was a ridiculous sort of play, but it wasn't quite as funny as you normally are.
It was a play called Undone by Facts, and it was written by a guy called Phil Whelans, who is a very funny character. In fact, he was one of the writers on one of the Brian Connolly series, and that's where I first met Phil and Tom Mitchelson. The two of them wrote this play called Undone by Facts, and we did it at where was the play?
The Hen and Chickens.
The Hen and Chickens in Islington, yeah. And we did it for a week, I think it was, and I really enjoyed doing it. It was a totally off the wall piece, but I loved it. And they were going to do something else, and then it just didn't happen, unfortunately.
But we keep threatening to get this off the ground. Dad wrote a play for us. Originally, that was some years ago, about 15 years ago, and we need to update it a little bit now, but it's called Dead End, and it sounds a bit macabre, but it's with a comedy aspect. It's about what happens literally the moment after you die, and the premise is one of us taking the other one through that process and helping them cope with it, but it's done in an amusing and slightly ridiculous
way. I'd like
way.
to think it's amusing, yes, but we will get that off the ground, actually. We've got to get it off the ground soon while I could still learn it.
You said it's a serious business comedy.
Yeah.
And pantomime, you do have to be serious as well. Yeah. And a lot of the time you do find the funnier the performer, like Norman Wisdom, amazing straight actor as well.
Yeah, that's true actually. And Ken Dodd. I mean, Ken Dodd, he did Shakespeare.
Wonderful.
He played Malvolio in whichever Shakespeare production Malvolio is in. I can't think of it.
Yes, we'll edit that
Is
one
it
in.
The Merchant of Venice? I'm not sure.
Come on, say a few and I'll edit the right one in.
Yeah. But no, you're right actually, and I've worked with a lot of comedians who were great straight actors. But the funny thing is, the other way round, great straight actors can't necessarily do comedy. You know, it's quite interesting that, because let's face it,
you worked with some actors that were doing pantomime and didn't really like it, didn't you? Like straight actors.
Well, Richard Bryars, although what a lovely man, Richard Bryars, he didn't enjoy doing pantomime because he couldn't get used to that the getting away of the fourth wall.
Yes.
You know, the reacting to the audience and all that stuff.
How have you found audiences? Have they changed much over the years?
I normally just go out on stage and there they are. Sorry. But no, I suppose they have changed a bit. It's certainly changed pantomime audiences, because it used to be, we used to open on Boxing Day. I mean, that was the terrible thing. Christmas Eve, you'd do your dress rehearsal, then you'd have Christmas Day to worry about it, and then Boxing Day you'd open, and then run into February or March even. But after the school holidays, when the kids went back, you used to then depend on pensioners and those sort of groups coming in to see the show. That doesn't seem to happen now. So they get crammed, the audience cram into like 3 weeks, and you get that complete cross-section of people, kids. I mean, we now do a lot of school shows, don't we? Schools take over the theatre for like a morning. You have a 10 o'clock in the morning show, which is a killer, really.
But you end up actually thinking about it when you write now and when you rehearse, that you do have to perform to 2 different kinds of audiences, because you'll get around about a third of the shows are to between 5 and 10-year-olds, pretty much all of them, I'd say for 10 teachers or something, compared to then the sort of much broader cross-section of entire families. And although it's nice to do the shows to the younger kids, when you have a whole group of school children in, things like the ghost gag goes so well, it's unbelievable. They're just, the whole place is screaming at you, and that's brilliant. But then you've thought of these sophisticated jokes that are getting nothing, and you're like, that's really clever, why don't you understand? So I look forward to the more family audience,
a mix,
having a bigger mix.
Yeah.
But also the productions themselves have had to develop over the years. I can remember being a kid and going to watch shows, and you'd be bored when the songs came on. Because my dad and uncle were comedians, I always enjoyed the comedy more anyway, so I know I might not be the same as everybody, but in shows you knew when some of the songs came on it was going to be a toilet break for the kids, or if there was an opportunity that might be when they did it. But then producers now put a lot more chart music in and pop songs that they know kids love, and it keeps them with their attention there for the whole thing.
That has made a big difference, actually. I remember doing Panto with Edmund Hockridge, who was a Canadian but great singer, and he used to, as the emperor or the king or whoever he was in the Panto. That was with Lorraine Chase, actually, and Jeff Holland at, it was Aladdin at the Ashcroft at Croydon. And Edmund had to sing, This Is My Beloved, you know, love's promising sighs, petals on a pool drifting. And it was a great ballad, and he sang it, but you'd hear all the seats going up as the kids went out to the toilet. But now he would sing something from the charts, and it would be a totally different reaction.
What's so funny as well, we've done this in Aladdin's. The producers have hired an emperor of China who's got a really good operatic voice, and to plan it must seem a bit bizarre, but we had a guy who'd, during the wedding scene of Princess Jasmine and Aladdin, suddenly break into Nessun Dorma. And obviously it was more prevalent when the World Cup was on in Italy in the 90s, because they used it as a theme tune, but kids now wouldn't have a clue about that. But you can see, even with the school shows, the kids absolutely amazed by this powerful voice and singing it, and it always goes so well.
Yeah, that was Paul Arden Griffiths, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then this year we had a guy called Ryan Taylor, and he sang Time to Say Goodbye, the Andrea Bocelli thing. But again, this same sort of style, it's suddenly a much more serious moment and a serious song, and it stormed it.
Yeah,
all
it
the
really
time.
did. The kids loved it as well. You know,
And that's
it's just
interesting to me, because you wouldn't imagine that they would enjoy that. But it's like when you're getting constant upbeat pop music and ballads that are in the charts all the time, suddenly hearing something they don't necessarily know, you realise, oh, that does still impress people, you know. So,
But he did do it well, Ryan, as well, didn't he? Yeah, great. Good.
What's your favourite then routine to do? Because you mentioned the ghost gag earlier.
yeah.
Funnily enough, it's a sketch I wrote some years ago, and we did it for the first time in pantomime at Worthing, didn't we?
Oh, at the Pavilion.
You know Matt Evers, who's on Dancing on Ice.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was
Mark Reed from A1,
from the boy band A1, yeah, and Ben and I, and it's you can see it you can see a bit of it on YouTube with them, and it's called Doodah, and the thing is, we're trying to be a barbershop quartet, and we sing, all the Camptown ladies sing this song, and then Matt used to sing Doodah, and Mark would sing Doodah, and he'd sing the Camptown Racers, 5 miles long. They'd both go Doodah, Doodah, and I'd just have the word day, and I'd finish it, you know, and then I'd turn around and say the immortal words, excuse me, I haven't got a Doodah, and it went on from there. But Matt Evers, there's one bit in it, absolutely brilliant what he did. I keep meaning to phone him, because he's now he's dancing with H on Dancing on Ice. I must ring him and congratulate him on that. But also, we shared a dressing room with him and Mark. It was the 4 of us in the #1 dressing room, and we had such a laugh with them. But that sketch, we actually questioned whether we should put it into pantomime, but people would come to us and say, our kids were singing Doodah, Doodah at the breakfast table, and everyone seemed to love it, and it worked so well.
Yeah.
I was really pleased.
To me, I always enjoy doing routines you've seen done somewhere else and know it's going to go well. Like the 12 Days of Christmas is a well-known sort of panto routine now, but it can be adapted and you have different props in it and things like that. And I get frustrated when I see it done. I think, oh, I'd do that instead, or I'd do that instead. So it's nice to do it how you want to do it.
Yeah.
Equally, I saw the If I Were Not Upon the Stage routine. You know, if you've seen pantos, you'll know that, which is a cleverly choreographed thing with different actions. So all the performers are narrowly missing each other. And I saw that at the Palladium a couple of years ago with Julian Clary, Nigel Havers doing it, Paul Zerdin doing it. It was one of the best I've ever seen it done, because there was the brilliantly choreographed near misses, and there were moments where they were deliberately hitting each other, and it was done so well. It was brilliant. So I'm looking forward to doing that again.
Yeah.
In terms of our own routines, we have a vampire flying routine that we do, and even though I say it myself, it's probably the one that gets the best reactions whenever we do anything. And I always enjoy doing that. That, you know, is always going to go really well.
It's me in a parachute harness being pulled up and down on a rope. I mean, it's insane. And at my age, I shouldn't even be thinking about it now, but I love doing it as well.
He has his own parachute harness with all the proper sort of safety equipment and stuff, and it has these metal bits on the shoulders just for reinforcement.
Yeah.
One time we did it at the Assembly Rooms in Derby, and the guy helping him put it on inside out without knowing, so he clipped himself into it. Once you're on it, you can't do anything, you know, you've just got to do it. But these metal parts are then digging into his collarbone every time he got lifted up and down.
Like the true professional I am, Hayden, I went ahead and did it and cried for some time afterwards.
But I could tell on stage that something, what the audience wouldn't have had a clue, but I could just see in his eyes something wasn't right, and he'd gone slightly greyer than normal. I was like, something's dodgy there, what's up? And then when he told me afterwards, I couldn't believe he hadn't let on. Unbelievable.
What about the slosh scenes then? You must have done so many over the years.
We did 4 pantomimes with Danny LaRue, and we always did a slosh scene in the kitchen with him. But we had strict instructions, nothing must go on Danny at all. You must avoid his costumes totally. Actually, I don't know if it's still backstage at the Churchill Theatre Bromley, one of the pantos we did there. There was a photograph of Danny squirting a soda siphon into my face. And it's a long jet from the thing, and they had that photograph backstage. I've never had a copy of it. I must try to get that. But that was funny, because, God, you mustn't go near Daddy with any of this slosh, and we always got away with it. Actually.
One of the shows we did in Derby, we did a slosh scene with Jeff Holland, and a comedy actor called Greg Haste. And again, Jeff Holland came on in his pristine Dame costume. The three of us came on in overalls, so you could tell who was going to get covered in stuff.
Jeff had to steer clear.
Yeah, but he always used to get the most. But I remember the producers saying to me, "We've paid a lot of money for this theatrical gunge that a company have provided us with. We can't let you have it in rehearsals because you've got the right amount for all the dress rehearsals and the shows. So once you get it there, you'll love it." When we made it up on the first dress rehearsal, it just made this foam. It was just like soapy foam.
Yeah.
I was like, that's not gunge. What on earth? But we used it anyway, got away with it.
Yeah,
but he always had to get a bucket of it over himself.
It used to be shaving cream mixed with various colours and things, and the ASM, the assistant stage manager, would mix it all up with a proper whisk thing, and be a great consistency. But this stuff didn't work at all, really, did it? But no, I've had moments with.
But you had a
squash
thing
scene.
because we did a little internet series going round venues that my dad had worked at for his 50 years, and we had my uncle over and we interviewed several people, didn't we? And my uncle told this story of working with Danny LaRue. He had to get a custard pie in the face, and he'd done it for 2 or 3 weeks of the run, no problems at all. And it was Danny was trying to get Dad would duck down and Alan was stood behind him and would get this in the face, and for no particular reason, one show, as it hit him, he breathed in and he just inhaled all this shaving foam, and he said he thought he was going to die.
It was
such a
choking.
horrible
He
thing.
had to rush off stage.
Couldn't breathe, choking.
I've heard that about people before.
So you don't appreciate the dangers of a slush scene.
No, that's right.
Fred Emney Sr.
Oh, right. Yeah.
His father died after a slosh scene.
Really?
I only found out about that a little while ago.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Oh.
So it's risky business.
Yeah, it certainly is.
Have you had any sort of, I know you said about the parachute thing,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
any other...
I had
sort
a
of
moment,
moments?
it wasn't that
Ben
severe an
said
injury,
more.
but when we did Snow White at Derby, the Queen had a huge wooden throne that was ornately painted, and it was set in a particular part of the wing. And we had a blackout just before this scene where we had to run off stage in a blackout being chased. And it was fine. Again, we did it many times. And then one time, some of the crew had changed over and were different people doing it. And they set this throne in the different part of the wing. And I just ran off in a blackout straight into it. Banged both my shins really badly into this thing. And there was blood and it was bleeding, but it wasn't. I'm making a big deal of it for dramatic effect. It was in reality, it was fine. But the stage manager bought me a box of biscuits to apologise.
But it read well in the accident book.
Yeah.
When you wrote it.
There was one time I got a bad cough during the show and coughed so much I'd hurt my ribs. I remember thinking, have I cracked a rib by coughing? Apparently you can't do that, but I had this painful rib. And I went round telling everyone, I'm not going to be able to lift you up there, I can't do this in the show there because I've hurt myself, I'll have to give it a couple of shows till it gets better. And I realised there was a scene with the Ugly Sisters, I'd forgotten to say anything to them, and they came either side of me and would do this hip wiggle and hit me with their bums from each side. And it suddenly dawned on me I was going to just have to... I couldn't tell them in the middle of the show not to do it. I was just going to have to take the pain. And they came and did this thing, and I remember standing there like, that's not acting, that's real.
But there is a thing, Dr. Theatre, whatever happens to you on stage, you get through whatever you're doing and then feel the pain afterwards, really.
You hit your head on some scenery at Worthing and had a gash in your head in the show.
Yeah, pathetic.
But I don't remember anything more major than that.
No, I mean, the worst one was the first Panto, again, harking back to Bath in '68, when Alan, my brother, was taken ill and was whisked into hospital, and I had to do 6 performances without him, and that was when we were just a vocal act. So I didn't enjoy that much. But
the
always
harmonies
remember,
were lacking. That.
we left him in the digs and went down to the theatre to tell Mr. Maddox that he wasn't going to be in that afternoon. Fran and I, my wife and I, and when we got back to the digs, we didn't know where he was, and there was a lady, Mrs. Norris, standing at the top of the stairs, and she just looked down at us. She said, "I've got some bad news for you, dears. He's gone." And I really thought she meant he'd died. And my immediate thought was, what am I going to do? But she meant he'd been taken to the hospital. But it was just, I can still remember the way she said it. It was frightening. But he'd broken a rib. He'd cracked a rib. And that was, they found out a couple of days later in the hospital and sent him back. And didn't even strap him up or anything. He just came back and carried on.
We had one production of Aladdin that some unbelievable things happened in a few years back. We dealt with this in one of our videos, but I'll happily share it with you. Apparently, Paul Holman, our producer at the moment, he said to us that some producers think of Aladdin as a bit unlucky as a production to do, and I'd never heard of that before. But this time it was in Chesterfield at the Pomegranate Theatre, and just before rehearsals started, the guy who was going to play Abanazar had a serious bereavement in his family and pulled out of the show. So we didn't have an Abanazar for the first 2 days while they got someone else to replace him. Then this guy started. Then the guy who was the Emperor of China had a back injury on the way up to the show. During rehearsals it got worse and worse. After the first weekend's performances he had to leave, so we had understudies on then. And then it turned out that the guy who was going to be Abanazar, who had this bereavement, had now had a couple of weeks, the funeral had happened, he sort of was okay. So they asked him if he'd want to play the Emperor of China. He came back to do that. In the dress rehearsal, we'd said to the band, well, there had been some issues with the sound, and we said to the band, whatever happens now, we are starting. Because they'd gone to start a couple of times and the monitors weren't right for them, and then being able to hear wasn't right, so they'd stopped. And the sound man was getting frustrated, and we said, whatever happens now, just start the music and we're going through it or we'll run out of time, so don't stop. They started and something went even worse wrong and they stopped again. The sound man got really annoyed and rushed down to the pit, stood up too quickly and smacked his head on the ceiling of the pit and cut it open really badly. Had to be taken to hospital, get stitched up. And then all these things happened and the production kind of settled down. All these understudies were on and people changing parts. Then the old Abanazar came back and was the Emperor. It was all fine.
Are you following this?
Yeah. And then the final thing, about a week from the end, Lee Brennan, who was in the boy band 911, was joint top of the bill with Liz McLaren. He was Aladdin, and in the opening dance routine, he tore his calf muscle on one of his legs. He said he heard a snap. And I don't know how he still did that show, sort of hopping about and limping about. Then he went to A&E, and the doctor said he shouldn't go back to the show. He was off for a couple of days, but then he didn't want to let everyone down. He did the last 4 days on crutches as Aladdin.
Yes.
So all that happened in the same production.
I think that's the most emotional production we've had right now. Things like that happening. Yeah.
How do you look after yourselves then in pantomime runs? Because there's always the lurgy going around.
Yeah, always. Yeah, actually, it was in Derby. Someone, who was it, gave me the breathing thing breathing steam in. I can't, because I had a very bad sore throat. Can't remember who that was.
Might have been Sue Holderness, wasn't it?
Yeah, it might have been. Yeah, Sue Holderness, who was Marlene in Only Fools and Horses. Her and Sylvester McCoy were in this pantomime. Actually, that was a great moment. They used to sign autographs at the stage door and then get on their bikes and cycle off into the night. And I always thought it was good seeing Doctor Who just cycling off on a bike. But yes, I think it was her gave me this thing, and because I had a really bad sore throat, but that used to help a great deal. And of course, you'd have the usual thing of all the cold and influenza things around you on your tabletop in the dressing room. Just to ward it off.
I always used to accept I'd just get a cold during Panto and have to deal with it, and then only a couple of years ago my mum said to me, just take vitamins or take something to try and stave it off, and the last couple of years I've been fine and I haven't had anything. So that's my tip, take multivitamins during Panto at least.
Well, I remember having the flu jab, because they always say you can't get flu from the flu jab, but when I last had it I was so ill it wasn't true, so I don't risk it now. I just do the same thing as you, take vitamins and keep my fingers crossed.
What would be your advice then for possibly young double acts?
Well,
double acts are rarer now, aren't they, I think?
Yeah, I suppose they are a bit, and they've changed really. It's not so much now the straight man and the comic, it's really two comics. And
there's a gap in the market though, isn't there?
Yeah, there is really, I suppose.
Yeah.
The thing is, I don't know actually where you learn your trade now, because it used to be like become a red coat at Butlins or a blue coat at Pontins, get the chance to work in front of audiences and just get the feel of it, you know.
I think it's quite important. There are still touring shows going round, and my wife is a choreographer and has produced some shows as well, and would audition people, and people can have great voices, people can be brilliant at acting and moving and dancing, and be really uncomfortable at talking to an audience as themselves. And you can get even big name actors and stuff who you say to them at the end of a panto, do you want to do the curtain speech and just thank everyone? They're like, oh no, I don't want to talk to anyone. They're fine when they're given lines. To be yourself is really difficult.
Yeah.
And through doing a lot of impro and stuff, I used to compare our impro shows and just get used to talking to an audience, and I think that's a really valuable skill. I would say to a lot, not just double acts, to a lot of performers starting out, try and imagine what it would be like to host something or introduce someone. And again, there aren't too many shows now where you can do that, where you can get these sort of variety shows where someone will come on, introduce someone else, or, you know, compare a show or something like that, because that's something that people can get nervous about, even really experienced people.
The double act I'd really like to see do pantomime is Anton Deck. You wouldn't have to tell them everything, and they would fill any theatre they were in, but they would, I'm sure they would be brilliant, actually, in Panto. They could take it.
They did Sunderland many years ago.
Oh, did they?
Geordie's in Sunderland.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
God, that's pushing their luck a bit, yeah. But I'm sure they would be fantastic. But of course they do I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here every November, so they wouldn't want to know about Panto.
But you see, they've just won the Best Presenting Award for however many years running at the NTAs and stuff. Like you say, there is a gap in the market because there doesn't seem to be a sort of newer up-and-coming double act presenting like that. There's that Sam and Mark who are just bringing back Crackerjack, aren't they? So maybe they'll get
we've just got an idea for a game show for television, and we want to do it ourselves, but whether they'll accept a father and son doing something like that on telly, I don't know. But you've got to try these things and have a go, haven't you? You know, and that's what this business is all about, really.
Well, with the advent of Britain's Got Talent as well, you know, we missed a talent show on TV for years, and now you've got special acts in your front room again.
Yeah, that's right. But it's like I mentioned earlier, winning opportunity knocks and then doing that search for a star as well. When we did that, after that I said I will never do another television talent show because it puts you under so much pressure. You know, it's an unbelievable thing to do, actually. So I would like to steer clear of that sort of thing, but I don't know how else people like us get on telly anymore.
Well, I like BGT, and it is entertaining, and it has given an outlet for more established variety performers to do something on TV. But you can see with the people who are new to it and have been given an opportunity, they only get to do something for about 5 minutes, and if you progress you might do a first round, a semi-final, and if you get all the way to the final you might have done stuff for a total of about 8 minutes on TV, and then suddenly you can't go out and do a half-hour act in a theatre somewhere. You know, you've got to build it up, then you've got to carry on learning your craft and stuff. So it's certainly good in that it keeps it in the public eye, but also I think it's still performers have to develop even if they get somewhere from that.
It's going viral as well, which means a different thing these days, doesn't it? But in the hope though that you become this YouTube sensation that people have in their hands.
That's right, exactly. I mean, we put a lot of little video comedy bits on there, and in the hope that it would go viral, you know. But I think reaching 100 people isn't viral, you know, is it?
No, it's barely the sniffles, isn't it?
I think
but
so.
we always like to, particularly when we're in a pantomime, this started off with me and a friend of mine, Adam Jenkins, who was a dancer in the shows with us. We'd produce an awards night for the company, just like an in-house jokey awards night, and we'd make a video to go along at the end of the show, not to be released to the public. It was just... But we have then done behind-the-scenes comedy videos every single day the last 3 years, and they only last a minute or two. But it's quite nice doing that now as well, and a lot of those are on YouTube and Facebook and stuff like that.
Yeah. And this year we did a thing, 10-second movies, our company presented, and the only one I can remember actually is the choreographer coming up to Ben and saying, "Where's your dad? Where's Keith?" And he said he's had to leave with an embarrassing problem, and then the title would come up, "Gone with the Wind." So they were the sort of ideas. I'm afraid that shows you how low we were stooping.
We had one where everyone was crouched around someone lying down on stage going, "Is there a doctor in the house? Is there a doctor in the house?" And you just heard someone shout, "No!" And the film was Dr. No.
So we did a load of those sort of things. A lot of
real
them were
Christmas crackers.
cringe-worthy stuff, yeah. But I've got to say, and I'd like to reiterate what I said at the start of this, Hayden, because what you're doing, I think, with these podcasts is absolutely brilliant. Keeping, hopefully, the people who listen to these will just get some entertainment out of it, but also take an interest in what we're all doing with pantomime, because it's really important to keep it there and keep it loved by a whole new generation, I think, because it really is special.
Thank you so much.
No, it's great, really great.
I need to ask you, your distinctive look, before marketing kind of was a thing, your face on the posters with the hair, was that a conscious decision?
Yeah, well, it was actually. There were two things I did when I was with my brother Alan. We said we've got to have some sort of gimmick. And I said, I'll either go bald or grow my... And we decided bald would look a bit grotesque. And people might think I was a bowling ball and put their fingers up my nose. So we went with the big mop of hair. And when I look at some of the videos now, I can't believe the amount of hair I had. And actually, when we first worked with Ken Dodd, he used to do a thing with his hair. And he commented on it as well, but he let me keep it like it was. But I remember walking through York. We were up in York working, and there were some punks standing on the roadside. And as I walked by, my brother heard one of them say, "Blimey, look at that bloke's hair." And they had Mohicans and things, but I had this huge mop.
But
we used to do a gag with a wig. I'd start with a wig on, and Alan would say to me, "That looks ridiculous, take it off." And of course, when I took it off, my hair was the same underneath. It was a nice gag.
When I look back to family photos now from when I was about 7 or 8, Dad's hair is fairly big even now, but it was absolutely crazy. If you imagine the biggest 70s afro wig you can imagine, it was like that. And still, none of my friends ever took the mickey out of me or said, "Why does your dad look so ridiculous?" It was just everyone accepted it. Yeah. But I look at some of these photos, I cannot believe you look
amazing,
like that.
yeah.
So mid-80s, it was at its biggest, I think.
Unfortunately, now it's grey, but I have got a grey wig now that I can put on over the top.
Well, I have hair envy.
Yeah, great.
Right then, this leads me on to my last question.
Yeah.
Your dream pantomime. Now, I'm going to ask you individually, of course.
Yeah.
You can be in it, or you could be in the stalls watching it.
Yeah.
You can choose the production. You could even write it and direct it if you'd like.
Yeah.
And your cast can be alive or sadly no longer with us.
Oh, right. God.
Well, that's tough to compile a list. I think without me worrying about who I would cast in it, I'd say from my own experience of all the ones we've done together, a lot of the time we've had to sort of crowbar in an extra part for me, so there'd be a king part for Dad and I'd be his assistant, Lord Chamberlain or flunky or something like that. But I loved Dick Whittington because I got to be the captain of the ship in Dick Whittington. I had some questionable tights in one production, but I like Dick Whittington. You get the ship, you're going to get some great scenery with it because you get the ship, you get the drama of the shipwreck. And then I always liked the sort of distressed costumes you would get when you'd been shipwrecked, and we'd have sort of shirts that were ripped apart and trousers that were ripped. So I think I'd quite like to put on a Dick Whittington and be the captain in it myself.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, for me, it would be Babes in the Wood that I mentioned earlier, because that's the greatest pantomime for a comedy double act, the good and the bad robber. So the bad robber is the straight man and the good robber is the comic, who doesn't really want to do all the nasty things. Who I'd have in it, because I've done the only two Babes in the Woods I've done. One was with, I mentioned earlier, the great Nat Jackley, and the other one was Richard Bryars. No, I did two with Richard Bryars, so I've done three Babes in the Woods. Yeah. I must just tell this story. It's in a book by Roy Hudd. Roy Hudd's Theatrical Anecdotes many years ago, and this story is in there, and it's absolutely true. Alan and I were the robbers in Babes in the Wood with Nat Jackley, and we did one scene where we broke into the nursery to kidnap the babes, and the nurse, Nat Jackley, is in bed, and he used to wake up and chase us round the room, and then we'd all jump onto the bed, and the bed was supposed to collapse, and then a maroon would go off, you know, the loud explosion, big bang, and it didn't go off this particular matinee. But as we jumped on the bed and laid there, instead of the maroon going off, Nat Jackley, and excuse me, but he broke wind very loudly, which everyone heard. We were trying to stifle laughter, and he just looked at us, and as the maroon hadn't got off, he just said, "Well, that'll have to do." Then there was the blackout, thank goodness, because we could hardly control ourselves. But I mean, working with all the people I've worked with, like John Inman and Danny LaRue, Des O'Connor, Ken Dodd, Jeffrey Hughes, who I mentioned, and Jeff Holland, Lorraine Chase, Leslie Joseph, John Nettles, they've all been brilliant, and I've left out so many people there as well. But, I mean, you couldn't get all those people together for a panto, but it would just be lovely to just see a lot of them again who are no longer with us. Actually, the talk I do, I obviously talk about a lot of people who are no longer with us, and someone said to me the other day, it's not so much a talk, it's more like a seance. Which is a bit sad, really, but I'd just love to be able to work with all those people again.
I'll tell you what, I'll let you have a party. How's that?
Yeah.
Just a party with all your...
Thank you.
I would think a dream panto people, if you could choose anyone, who even people who aren't here anymore, Danny LaRue as a Dane, Norman Wisdom as a comedy character, John Nettles as a baddie would be brilliant.
Yeah, it would, actually. But I always remember Paul Elliott saying to me, he said, I would really like to put on a pantomime with no name, no top of the bills in it at all, but all people who are great at panto. You know, and I'm glad to say he included my brother and myself at the time. You know, he said, you're not big names to the public. He said, but you do pantomime well. And he said, and I would love to put on a panto that didn't depend on a star name, but just had good pantomime people in it. And there's been great pantomime people, going back to like Jimmy Mack, who I mentioned, Ronnie Collis, Billy Burden, who was a country yokel comic. Great people, you know.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. And Danny O'Day, I remember, who finished up in Last of the Summer Wine. He was the king in the panto we did at Swansea, and I had to do a magic act with him as his straight man, actually. But great characters, and all those people. I just like to think I learnt something from all of them over the years, and it's just given me this love of this particular type of performance. You know?
That's what's good about it as well. I'd guess all the people you've mentioned, anybody that you've worked with that you haven't mentioned, you know, for that pantomime run where you all work together, you're all part of the same team to make it happen and entertain everybody, you know. So it doesn't matter whether you're the top of the bill getting a lot of money, it doesn't matter whether you're working on the front of house, just making sure everybody sits in the right places, you know. Everyone's part of something
important
together.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's so true.
Well, guys, thank you so much for sharing your story with me.
Well,
Thanks,
thank you for
Hayden.
letting us do this, Hayden. I hope there hasn't been too much noise in the background.
It'll be fine. It'll be fine.
Great.
Cheers.